Hello, everyone. Appreciate you dropping by for another episode of the podcast. This is your host, Patrick McCall, and I don't like to talk too much or take up a ton of time, but I do have a very important disclaimer to give out here before we begin with today's guest. And at the time this podcast was recorded, Chris King was the voice of the Idaho Vandals, but in the final rounds of interviews and steps to become the next voice of the Washington State Cougars, which is his alma mater. With that, I held this episode from release for a few weeks, and seriously, huge congratulations to Chris, who's just been named the new voice of Washington State. It's a moment of a lifetime for him, and he certainly deserves every bit of it. So, as far as the information he gives, a lot of it is still very relevant, and it's great to hear him talk as well about the West Coast League and minor league ball. So, on top of that, Chris is going to have several of those same duties at Idaho just now with Washington State. So, once again, this pod was recorded a few weeks prior to that announcement for Chris, but really, everyone sent him a congratulations, and now we can get started with the 11th episode of the Announcers Hour podcast. Hello, everyone. Thanks for stopping by for another episode of the Announcers Hour podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCall, and today we have Chris King on the podcast. He's the voice of the Idaho Vandals and also serves as the Deputy Commissioner and Media and Communications Director for the West Coast League, which is their premier wood bat league out west. So, that said, we're going to dive into King's, wealth of experience here in college athletics, baseball, and more. I mean, Chris, how you doing?
Patrick, I'm doing great. It's been really fun to get to know you this summer with your work with the Ridgefield Raptors, and I'm good as we talk here today. We're in this beautiful stretch of the summer. We're talking baseball. Fall camp for football is not too far away. Basketball schedules will be out before we know it. So a lot's going on.
Yeah, for sure. And can you tell everyone a little bit more about those roles that I mentioned, what the roles that you're currently in and what you're also responsible for while doing those?
Yeah, so my main job is very proud to work at the University of Idaho as the football and men's basketball broadcaster. With that, also host all of our coaches shows. We just launched a podcast last year. We'll be rolling that back out and into the future. A lot of fun conversations on that. So that's my main job is to broadcast every home and away game for University of Idaho football, for University of Idaho men's basketball, and then all the other fun stuff that comes with that. And the way that the schedule works out, it allows me to also do this work with the West Coast League, as you mentioned that role. And I worked in the West Coast League. I have a great passion for not only broadcasting, but I love baseball. I love baseball in the Pacific Northwest, and I've had kind of a longer history with the league, where one of my closest friends, he played in the West Coast League. I went and stayed with him and his host family when the league was in its first years. Then I announced in the league for Wenatchee starting in 2008. Then worked a year-round full-time for 2 years with Wenatchee, and then had a great experience there, and then was able to start my journey into college broadcasting at Boise State, doing women's basketball there. And so it's been 13 years doing Division One college sports. So those are kind of the two jobs. I did minor league baseball for a number of years, and the addition of our family, our son was born just a little over 2 years ago. So out here in the West, well, it's not like the Midwest or the East Coast where, minor league teams and Division One schools, they're all right next to each other. You can just hop in your car and drive a little bit, and you're right at another. We're kind of spread out. So I worked for the Tri-City Dust Devils and had a wonderful experience there. But when my son was born, something kind of just had to give time-wise. And with that, had an expanded role with the West Coast League. And still, when I get a chance, I love filling in to broadcast baseball. But I get to be at home, and home here is on the Palouse. So this great area that we have here in the Pacific Northwest between Moscow and Pullman and a number of other smaller surrounding communities, but those are kind of the two big cities there. So yeah, those are my jobs working with the West Coast League. But my main thing, my passion is working as a broadcaster, and just really grateful that I get to do that at a place like the University of Idaho.
It'll be good to touch on the many roles you've held and stuff. And I'm wondering, how is it working with Rob there, and how much do you work with him specifically in the West Coast League in the summer?
Rob is wonderful. He is such an asset to the league, in my opinion. He is so uniquely qualified to do this job. And it's kind of one of those jobs, at least from my point of view, that it's hard. I mean, you wear so many hats, you have your hands in so many things. And Rob is, I mean, obviously just an incredible baseball mind. his accomplishments as a journalist, his accomplishments as an author. And so to have him with the West Coast League, I think is just a huge, huge deal to have someone like Rob in that role. And I get to witness firsthand how hard he works at it, how thoughtful he is with it. He is so great at the job he does. I couldn't imagine someone better to work with in the role that I have. He has been just outstanding. He really is. And the league grows. That's the fun thing in my time with the league. I started, helping out with communications in 2016, and things have just kind of grown and evolved with my involvement since then. And being able to work with Rob as the league has even grown so much since he took over as commissioner, it's been fun to see. And just anything that experiences growth like the West Coast League has, it's really neat to see that and to see communities get baseball that haven't had it, to see the continued growth of baseball for some of the charter members in the West Coast League. And it's sort of a lot of things in life to me are like planting seeds. You plant seeds, and there's just been so much positive growth. And you look at the player development side of things, that so many of these outstanding players from the West Coast League have gone on to do great things. It just, as we record this, it was announced not that long ago that there are 5 West Coast League alumni who have been tabbed to play in the Major League All-Star game. That's really, really impressive. And when I was in Wenatchee, I had a chance to be around some really outstanding players. Marco Gonzalez is definitely one that stands out from when he was in the West Coast League that I got to work with when he was in Wenatchee. But even the guys who were in the league, Wenatchee, this is fun to me. I like going back and looking at old box scores. You look at 2010, there were some Wenatchee Corvallis games that were really loaded with talent. You had a guy like Marco Gonzalez on the Wenatchee side, and a couple other guys who reached the big leagues, Mitch Haniger, Matt Boyd, who went on to reach the big leagues. So it's neat seeing the growth of the league and getting to work with someone like Rob as things just continue to be pushed forward and taking exciting new steps ahead.
That's amazing. And for those that, again, are unfamiliar, the West Coast League, definitely a somber wood bat league out here out west in that Pacific Northwest scene. And as Chris was talking about, there's like hundreds of players that have gone on from this league to play in Major League Baseball. And as you mentioned, 5 alumnus of this league are now in the MLB All-Star game this season. So it's really quite a stage and a spot to see all that talent go from here and then develop over the years and eventually get to that high level. But, and speaking of the All-Stars, what went behind that process and the decisions to bring back the All-Star game this year for the West Coast League?
A good question, and probably Rob and people from each of the teams would probably, be better to speak to that. But I think, it's safe for me to say that it is a really fun showcase event. There's so many great communities in the West Coast League that are very capable of hosting this kind of, outstanding event to show off the talent that's in the league, the players who have done such a great job either this so far this summer or some high prospects, and a chance for these communities to see all the great players. Now there's 16 teams in the league, and to see them all in one spot. So I know since went on hiatus, obviously it was a tough stretch with COVID, and that kind of throws a lot of things up in the air. But I think it was a time that it got revisited, and folks were on board with bringing it back. And as we sit here today, I think by the time this probably airs, there's going to be even some more exciting news about the exposure aspect of the All-Star game. That just another big step forward for the league as far as I know the mantra for the league is player first, and to have these these initiatives and these things that happen that are really player first. So even more good news to come on the All-Star game.
How does a full year look like for you going more to your current roles? How does a full year look like for you now with the West Coast League in the summer and then the Idaho Vandals? Can you talk about, where you are and what you're doing for your broadcast prep and that kind of thing for your multiple positions?
Yeah, so I'm from the Northwest originally. I'm a Pacific Northwest guy through and through. I'm from Marysville originally, and if you'll indulge me for a second, just kind of how nerdy I am. So Marysville's close to Everett. They have the Everett Aqua Sox. Myself, my family, we go to Aqua Sox games growing up as kids, and one of my favorite activities, and this is like 96, 97, 98, would be to get on the internet, wait for it to load, see who the coaches were on those minor league teams, so I could go through my card collection to see if I could find the baseball cards for the opposing coaches who played in the big league. So if I could find Mitch Webster or a Keith Comstock, then I would hunt them down and have them sign their baseball card. So I'm a Pacific Northwest guy through and through. So being able to have these current roles in this, this region that I call home has been so fortunate for me and my family. So the timeline of it, the main job is my work as a broadcaster. I mean, that's what that's my passion. That's what I've grown up dreaming about doing. That's what I've been so fortunate to do. That's what I work on, pick other people's brains. Is how do I get better? Just like yourself, how do I get better as a play-by-play broadcaster? How do I get better hosting coaches shows? How do I get better, hosting podcasts? We weren't necessarily talking about podcasts 15 years ago, 10 years ago, not as much. What's going to be the next thing? How do we, with this new media, what can we do to move that forward? So, but timeline wise, in the summer, it's typically you're gearing up for the start of the fall, but it's a time of year where, when I did minor league baseball, that you could focus a lot on that. So now, a good chunk of my time is spent on the West Coast League, but it's also, you're always working to get ready for the next season for football and men's basketball. So whether it's, putting together the coaches show schedule for hopefully it works out with everyone, seeing when those crossover dates are, always working on my boards for football. We do the spring game for football, so that's a big time that's really helpful. We not only broadcast it, but it allows me to be there for, the vast majority of the practices, have my eyes on guys, work on my boards while those are going on, do the spring game coming up here soon. Fall camp will begin. Be out there, just be there, having eyes on guys, asking questions, having conversations with people so I can have the best possible broadcast when that first game comes along and when that first coaches show starts. So this time of year, West Coast League stuff is, a good chunk, but also just gearing up for everything on the Idaho side. We'll start the podcast in the not too distant future, record some of those interviews. Fall camp begins. Like I said, I'll be there. The first game for Idaho this year is August 31st in Eugene against the University of Oregon. So starting prep on Oregon and getting ready for that first game and the early opponents. And then, by the time the West Coast League season ends and slows down, is right about that time that, you're a couple of weeks out from the start of the football season. So it's busy. I mean, football season is very busy. I absolutely love it. I would have it no other way. But doing the podcast, typically record 2 interviews for that, getting those done early in the week, updating my boards, doing interviews. We do an hour pregame. That's on me to put that together. So usually 2 to 3 of those segments are interviews. So whether they're pre-taped, get those lined up, get those questions done. Coaches show on a Tuesday night, meet with coaches on a Thursday, all doing prep throughout this. They're very kind. We have a great coaching staff. They understand the role that we have as broadcasters. So I meet with our head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator every Thursday to pick their brain on the upcoming opponent. Do that, and then if it's a road game, travel Friday, and then boom, have the broadcast on Saturday, and right back to it on Sunday. The busiest time of year is when it's that crossover season, which is incredibly fun, but it is. Man, it is. There's not a lot of extra time in the day, which I'd have it no other way. But when both basketball is going on and football is taking place, last year we had a day where and this you dream of this kind of stuff, but we had a playoff football game and a men's basketball game in the same day. So it did both of those, and just making sure you're as prepared as possible. And then once football ends, basketball, preparing for basketball when football is, towards the tail end, and then just getting to enjoy the basketball seasons. Longer travel for basketball, having to go, again, out in our part of the country. It's not necessarily easy for some of even our conference travel. So to have that conference travel, have some longer weeks there to get from point A to point B, but doing that, enjoying that, and then by the time the conference tournament wraps up, that there's hopefully some freelance broadcasting work that pops up, and there typically is. I've been lucky. I've done games for the NAI World Series for a number of years in a row, so that's always a fun event to look forward to on Memorial Day weekend. And I shouldn't overlook. Again, have a family, have a wonderful wife who's very understanding of this profession. I'd say for anyone who gets into this, you have to have a spouse who is understanding, because you're not working typical 9 to 5 hours. That's just not a reality. You travel a lot. That they have to know and understand that going in, and then spend as much time as I can with my son. And like I said, we live here on the Palouse, a great place to live, very high quality of life here. So yeah, that's kind of the that's I'm giving you a long answer there, probably more than you bargained for, but that's kind of the whole year as it unfolds for me currently.
That's amazing. And I will, we'll definitely get into some of those intricacies in terms of your, football prep and basketball. But I was wondering, a lot of people are sitting out there, they want to get into baseball or they want to get into these sports they think they can announce or want to try and announce. They really don't know where to start. I mean, how did you get your start in broadcasting? Did you know you wanted to do it? And, what was that process like for you, moving into the industry?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's maybe I'm too thick-headed or stubborn, but this is what I always wanted to do. There was never any really thought of having the eye on the prize of anything else, and it's a competitive industry. I like here's the secret. This is a ton of fun. These jobs are hard to get because it's a privilege to have them. So it takes a lot of navigating. It takes where you live, how often the time of year you live there. Early on you're probably not going to make a whole lot of money. There's probably, you have to, really want this. You have to really have a fire in your belly. So for me, I did my first game when I was 15. I was very fortunate. The high school I was at, ended up the whole gym got wired. Out with that. Um, we're able to do games on the public access channel. This is, before streaming. I'm not trying to date myself too much. I'm not that old, but before, you could just easily, start a stream that you had to wire everything. We were very fortunate. There weren't many situations for a high school student to get those kind of games that were airing live on TV over a public access channel. So by the time I graduated high school, I probably had in the ballpark of 30 to 40 games under my belt, something in that range. I came to Washington State University. I'm very fortunate. There's an outstanding broadcasting school here. It's the Edward R. College, College of Communication, and some outstanding broadcasters. Obviously, Edward R. Murrow, who it's named after, Keith Jackson on the sports side. So I go in there, got an outstanding education at WSU. Along that time, I spent a good amount of time. I'd drive up to Spokane, about an hour, 15 hour, 20 minutes away. And every weekend, pretty much in the fall and winter, I would go up there as a freshman. I was able to get airtime. They did a high school sports recap show on KJR in Seattle, all sports station. And I was able to get on, and I would be on for 5-ish minutes. I would drive my Friday nights and go up there just to give a recap on this show. And this was at like I'd get on at 10 or 10:30. They actually were carrying the Sonics at this point. I'm really dating myself now because that you can really tell when that would have had taken place. That and I'd have to they carried the Sonics, then the show would get pushed back. So it might not be till 11 or 11:30. I'd get back to my dorm after midnight. But I got on the air. I got on the air for like 5 minutes on a station I grew up listening to, being from the Seattle area. So that was got my foot in the door there. I was able to translate that the next year. Comcast at that point, Xfinity was doing games on demand, so they would put it up like 48 hours later on their server for anyone in the state who wanted to watch it. So able to do their games in Spokane. So just kind of launched from there and doing games, and that was the goal. I mean, we could talk till we're blue in the face about theory, and I love talking broadcasting. As you can tell, you can get me going, but there's nothing that replicates actually doing the games. That is the most important thing. There is nothing that comes close to matching it. You get better at this by doing it. So I was able to do games there. Like I said, worked in Wenatchee. Ended up after I graduated, worked there full time year round for just under 2 years. Did sales there, and that was it was a really valuable experience because you learn that we're fortunate to be on the air because if sales is the engine, if there are not sponsorship sold, if there are not people in the seats, if there are not hot dogs being sold, that there's not broadcasting jobs to go with it. So that was a really valuable time I had when actually doing that. But I also wanted to do Wenatchee high school football. But I also knew if I was going to have a chance to pursue broadcasting at the highest levels, that I was going to have to, take my shot at it. So that's when the Boise State women's basketball job opened up. Able to get that, was there for 2 years, and then came to the University of Idaho, doing men's basketball. I just finished my 11th season doing that, and that blows my mind that it's gone by so quick. And then I've been very fortunate where the football job opened up later on and was able to just slide right into that. So it's been a number of years now where I've done both football and men's basketball. And then I did those years of minor league baseball for the Tri-City Dust Devils, ended up being 9 seasons there. And man, nothing matches, as you know, Patrick, doing baseball, you have no opportunity to get better over a shorter span. And I love doing football, but you're doing one game a week. There's a lot of work that goes into that one game, especially if you're a young broadcaster, getting some seasons of baseball under your belt because you just get those hours. You're getting reps every single day, and that helps for every other sport. So I did that for 9 seasons. There were some really outstanding players who came through the team I covered. Fernando Tatis Jr. played for them. Charlie Blackmon played for them. Trevor Story had a quick stint with the Dust Devils. David Bednar. I could kind of go on guys, but loved it so much. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got started, and just fortunate to be here and live in a place where I'm able to have such a high quality of life, have a family, and then get a broadcast at this level. And there's just not many of these jobs. There are really not that where you can be a college broadcaster and do football and men's basketball. They are hard to come by. So it's just a great privilege to be able to have that role at the University of Idaho and be able to have it for a number of years now.
And just to point it out for people, that was a great answer by Chris, but I think I like that you touched on getting started and kind of a lot of people out there. I think there's so many opportunities. You had a unique one back in the day to obviously go on that local channel, but I'm starting to see a trend from the guests we've had is just try and make your own repetitions there at the high school level, maybe even bring your own tape recorder to a game and just kind of sit there and get those reps in. And it's not going to be necessarily glamorous on the first, few reps there, but getting that experience is so important. And then, like Chris, you're able to, work your way through it and figure out the grind. And so, your first, I believe it was one of your first, I know, with the Apple Sox full time, pretty much broadcasting roles, day-to-day games in baseball. What did you learn doing that with the Apple Sox, and how was that grind? And how did you get into that role as well with the Apple Sox? Like, what was the process like there?
Yeah. So when you're talking when I first got hired and just did the games at the beginning.
Yeah, when you first got in there to the Apple Sox, how you're able to get that role, and assuming that was your first full-time broadcasting gig, and then what that was like, and you learned.
Yeah, so I just finished up my junior year at WSU, and the job was posted just so happened to be the team that my friend had played for. So I had gone to visit him, I'd watched him play, I'd stayed with his host family, so I was familiar. I'd been to a game, and where I'm from is about 2.5 hours away from there. And that was the dream. I mean, I could throw my hat in the ring to get the opportunity to do these games for the spot that they get excellent support. It's on a really good radio station, an incredibly well-run team. So yeah, I threw my hat in the ring and fortunate to be able to do it. And all the work that I had done leading up to that, all these high school games that I had done, kind of allowed me to turn in my tape and to put my best foot forward and to land that job. So I learned an incredible amount. So grateful. Ed Nags was the coach of the team. He's now on the staff of Corvallis, and I learned so much from him. And just he is such an enjoyable person to be around. He is, he's got his own unique sense of humor, but he was so great to me. Everyone was so kind to me, and I think it helps. I mean, here's the thing. You can't really teach feel, and I hope I have pretty good feel. That's what I strive for is try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and you get a long way in this business, if you have feel. If you a lot of times, and I'm talking a lot here, but you're asking questions and trying to answer them. But as a broadcaster, sometimes you have to remind yourself, 2 ears, one mouth, because no one really cares how smart you are when you're building relationships with people. They don't want someone who's just going to talk at them. They want someone who's going to have a conversation with them, and they want someone who's going to listen to them. So for me, just keeping my mouth shut and listening and treating people with respect. If you treat people how you want to be treated in anything in life, you will mostly things are probably going to work out just fine for you because that comes with you as broadcasters. Guys are overly critical. If they're not, I mean, if you just treat you say the fact if the team lost by 10 runs, the team lost by 10 runs, that you say the final score. Like I'm not big on like adding on, like I don't think I've ever questioned effort. Like that's to me, that's not what I do. That's not for me to judge. That's not how I see this role. I see myself as a storyteller. So what I try to do is to improve my play-by-play, improve my delivery as much as possible. But I want to find those great stories. I want to find those nuggets of information. I want someone to listen in and hear to themselves, wow, that's an interesting story. Because you want someone to tune in. Again, this is my thought, this is my philosophy on this. You want someone to tune in and the voice they hear, they think, well, that person sounds like they want to be there. And even if the team's having a good season, a bad season, a great game, a rough game, there is a story to tell every and no matter what the situation is. So I learned that first year a lot about that. And again, nothing replaces reps. You're traveling with the team. That was the greatest thing ever. Still is the greatest thing ever. When you there is an energy when you travel with a team that is kind of unmatched with anything else. There's just a great energy that you can feel, and it's infectious. It's we have as broadcasters, we have a very specific role when we're traveling with the team, but it's kind of like my two analogies are you're with the traveling circus in the most fun way possible, and you're also it's kind of like summer camp because never a day, and I'm sure you can probably attest to this, Patrick, never a day, whether it's announcing a football game, a men's basketball game at the college level, or where it was when I first started broadcasting, has never felt like a day of work. And there have been a lot of overnight bus rides where you get back when the sun has come up already. There are some rough bus rides. It's gotten better on the minor league side. It's gotten a lot better when they've restructured things and changed the scheduling and built in that off day every week. But even when you're running low on sleep, you worked a lot of days in a row. It never feels like work. I mean, how can you walk into a football stadium, walk into a basketball arena, walk onto a field on a beautiful summer day, and it feels like work? And that's so a lot of that, all that stuff really started early on. To answer your question about when I got started in Wenatchee, that was my first taste of it.
Thing is like, yeah, I love that you touched on about the work part of it because you really got to be into broadcasting. I think, it's a profession where you're all in or you're all out in terms of the fact that, if you're not really enjoying it, and doing the actual play-by-play, you might be in trouble because there is a lot of, like you said, long bus rides and grinds that you have to, be able to put up with and then still do that and then really enjoy the games. You really don't enjoy, doing the games and being around the guys and all the bus rides and everything like that. And it might not be for you. So just a precaution for those that are looking to get into it. And, speaking of the Apple Sox on the point, obviously you're a young broadcaster. Were there any times where you either made a big mistake and it was a learning lesson that you'll never forget, or you had, some kind of hit moment that you really had learned something that you also are taking to what you are now and help you build as a broadcaster, just any big learning lesson or moment there?
It's a really good question. I'm trying to think if there's one specific mistake that I could give as a great example. And as I'm struggling to do that, don't be fooled. There were plenty of them. I mean, you start out, that is just the nature of the beast. That if I go back and listen to it, I think I would be proud of the energy, proud of the delivery. No doubt there are things where it's like, gosh, however many games, I could do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games since then that you get better, you get smoother, you get more experience. I'm trying to think if there's one mistake that I made that stands out. There's not necessarily the one that comes to mind. It's an excellent question, and if I probably had this rattle around my brain for a couple more hours, I could probably think of one. But there were plenty of learning moments. There were so many, and you really become appreciative of the people that are around you, who you learn. And this industry, you need mentors. Like those are the people you learn from. And again, if I've had any sort of success in my career, it has a lot to do with being very fortunate to be around people who are very smart and very good and just listening to them and taking their advice. And a lot of people, when I'm sure those mistakes, when I would, you somehow make a mistake, I would turn to them and say, "Hey, what do you think?" Or have them listen to my tape. It's not the most fun to listen back to yourself. I think it's even if you're a broadcaster doing this, you still listen back to yourself and you're like, oh, that's what I sound like. But that's how you get better. You do that. You ask people you respect, your peers, your mentors, to listen to your stuff to see if they notice anything. Because, there have been, I know baseball, I've had habits over the years where you don't think about it at the time, but maybe you're leaning too much on one word or too much on one way you describe something. And someone else points it out. And it's like, that bell just got rung. You don't hear it yourself, but when someone else says it, it's like, gosh, how did I not pick that up? So, uh, self-critique, turning to other people to critique you to get better, that is all stuff that I learned from there, and that carries with me to this day. There are no broadcasters that who don't critique themselves, who don't go back and listen and try to get better. I had the good fortune. I was out a little over a week ago now, as we record this, at the NSMA Awards weekend, and they're just so much. What a great experience that is. They put on an awesome event, but the collection of broadcasters under one roof that you can listen to and learn from and have conversations with, and they have these different panels. And last time I was out there, about 6 years ago, Kevin Harlan was there too. Kevin Harlan was back this time, and hearing him in his session talk about the degree that he critiques himself, you don't become good at this by accident. You don't get to that high a level by accident. I mean, it is I don't want to make this sound too much, but it is a craft. It is not, you don't just fall out of bed and you do this at an incredibly high level. It takes a lot of work. So those were the things that, really started in Wenatchee there, that I've learned from those mistakes. And no one's perfect. We all still make mistakes, but learn from those and continue to improve.
Yeah, I totally put you on the spot with that kind of, question to ask about the mistakes, but I really wanted to bring it up just because, a lot of people are going to be sitting out there and having that, basically pause to maybe get into the industry, like, or they don't want to, or make those kind of mistakes, or afraid of either making a mistake on the air or, going into it, or looking back on the cringeworthy tapes. And you guys got to understand, like, that's all part of the process. So I think it's good to hear Chris, who's a veteran in this, give that take as well. And I certainly had my share of mistakes that, are embarrassing, and we could go into further detail for a while. But really, I mean, just to finish out on the West Coast League side of things, I mean, how did the opportunity, because you were with the Apple Sox and then you're with the Dust Devils, how did the opportunity to come back to the deputy commissioner spot fall into your hands, and fall back into the West Coast League from doing, affiliated baseball?
It's funny. It's just how timing works out, and you meet people along the way. Like, I've been so fortunate to just be around a lot of really great people who have been very kind to me and who I've been able to learn from. So yeah, how that worked out is I left the Apple Sox, went to work at Boise State doing women's basketball. Then that next summer, I was able to get into affiliated baseball, working for the Tri-City Dust Devils. And it was a few years down the road that, just in my time in the West Coast League, that met a lot of the folks who were involved with teams, and the league was growing. And it was late in 2015 that they had some folks in the league had kind of thrown out the idea of, hey, we're looking for someone to help with our communications, and we need someone who's just not affiliated with any team, but who also has product knowledge and knows baseball and knows the league. And they say, hey, this is what we're looking for. If you're, kind of thought of you, but if you're interested, maybe write something up and let us know if you would be. So I thought about it and thought, I kind of hemmed and hawed, because it would overlap with my work with the Dust Devils, but it wasn't going to be a lot of time. My role has really grown as far as the amount of time that it can kind of take in the summer, but able to do it. And then it kind of expanded and expanded, excuse me. And when I was working with the Dust Devils, there would be, little pockets of time you'd find early in the day. I mean, the days were busy, but to, know the stuff, and once what needed to be done. And once you got through the calendar, you kind of learned, okay, the cycle of things. When, okay, this is busy. This is when the All-Star game is going to happen. There's a lot going into that. This is when the Player of the Week announcement is made every week. This is when, the postseason awards are announced. This is when the Major League Baseball draft happens. So there's stuff in the off season, but it's a little quieter. So yeah, just folks that I worked with or known kind of threw the idea out, and I thought, well, in doing this, and especially to pursue it at the highest levels, I to do college at the Division I level, where you needed to be flexible. You needed to, when I lived in Boise, when I worked at Boise State, lived in Boise, I was just there for the season, and I was there and found a place to live for that short amount of time, and that 5 or 6 months. So you need to be flexible and you need to, the income part of it, you're trying to, stay as nimble and flexible as possible so you get those higher opportunities. So there was something with the West Coast League could make a little more income and it wouldn't take away from any of my broadcast work. So yeah, that's how I got started. And then just since 2016, I started January 1st, 2016, and then have just kept working with the league. And I love, again, I'm a Northwest native. I just love you go to a game and you see what the type of just family entertainment it brings to a community. And I love the baseball part of it. I love seeing these guys come and develop and have a great experience. And I was able to talk to so many guys who played in the West Coast League or who I covered and guys who got on to play in the big leagues when I worked with the Dust Devils and to hear their experience with the league and how they had a positive impact. So, there's anywhere from the guys who are big prospects on their way up and they're going to have positive memories of their time in the West Coast League. Are there guys who play in the league and that is if when they play in front of a sold out crowd in Ridgefield, when they play in front of a sold out crowd in Wenatchee on the 3rd of July, that's the peak of their career. That's a cool thing. That's a great memory for them to have. That's something they're going to tell their kids and grandkids about. So everyone who's involved in the experience, I love relating to that in a little bit, and just in whatever small way, try to help the league in my role.
On the topic of baseball, off that point about the WCL and your time as commissioner, you obviously were with the Tri-City Dust Devils and affiliated baseball. Firstly, can you talk to me about how you got into that role? And then secondly, what's the big difference between taking that step up from college summer baseball to working with guys who are in the professional realm?
Good question. I think back on it, and really, it was baseball is baseball. It kind of comes back to the same thing I mentioned before: is how do you build relationships with people? That's how do you learn? You do have to, there's a little more, I don't say ego involved, but when you hop on a bus for a minor league baseball team, I mean, there's some guys who've made a legitimate amount of money. So it's maybe a little more, guys who are older, that either some guys are really excited to be there because their career just started. Maybe some guys are frustrated that they are back there at this point in their career. But gosh, it felt the same. I mean, it's still how do you work every day to put on a better broadcast? How do you, build relationships so you can tell the best stories possible to create the most engaging broadcast? And I always think about if someone's tuning in, if there's someone on a drive, they're on a road trip, if there's a truck driver going by, if they tune in, I want to be able to keep them. That's what I would think about doing baseball, and that's what maybe I'm thinking about it more when I was in the Tri Cities because you could actually see the freeway just not too far over the outfield fence. But how do you keep them in? How do you engage them? And that part translated over. I mean, there's more, there's guys coming up and coming down. There's more that you learn along the way, but you kind of know going in about the intricacies of affiliated baseball and everything that goes with it. But it is, it really just comes down to learning, asking good questions, treating people how you'd want to be treated, and that really seems to kind of cross over any level, anything else. It really does, and it is. I mean, higher levels you do games, it's easier and harder to do prep. And by that I mean, maybe some guys who are, let's take, if you're doing a high school football game, for example, you don't necessarily have their full bio. You might have their stats, but they're younger in life. You don't necessarily have their full life story. If you're doing a Division I college football game, for example, I mean, at Idaho, I've done multiple games at a Big Ten road venue. I've done, games at WSU, at Oregon State, at Cal. There's a lot of info that you're getting not only for the Idaho people, but I know their info better than what's posted. That's my job is to know that inside and out. But for the opposing team, how do you decipher through every bit of information you can find on a Cal football player, for example, and to boil that down to what you know and what you have handy in front of you on your chart? Because doing prep is great, but how good are you at translating that into a story and weaving that into your broadcast? So those things really jump out. And one other thought that your question kind of reminded me of, and I started doing this when I was in the Tri Cities, and I would share this with any other broadcaster because I looked back on this recently, and I think this will really pay even more dividends down the road, even maybe for my son, for me, and decades down the road. I have my scorebook. I make a scorebook every year when I would do, doing baseball. go to Staples, have it bounded, put together. And I started every day writing in my scorebook in the margins like a little journal and saying what happened that day. Because Patrick, right now, if you were to tell me what happened on June 28th, 2013, I wish I had a better memory. I can maybe look at the box score. I could look at the pocket schedule from that year and try to connect the dots. But things fade over time. But my goal was every single day to write at least something about what happened that day. And because to me, this job is you're a storyteller, and then in your life, you're a storyteller. You're passing along, what happened in your life experiences to you if you have a family, to the next generation. That I can look back now, and I have 9 seasons of scorebooks that serve as a snapshot not only of my professional life, but my personal life. That is so valuable. I've even thought about it. If, fingers crossed this never happens, if my house is on fire, that's one of the first things I want to save because look at my memory. I mean, material stuff that comes, that goes, that can be replaced. But I need to like, this is on my to-do list, my projects is to scan them, to have them as a PDF to save them. So I would suggest to any broadcaster on a professional level, on a personal level, do it, do it. It's hard. It's busy. You're working every day. You're tired, but at least commit to every day during a baseball season because that really kind of like it gets you to sit down and do it. And the basketball schedule, the football schedule, it's not the same as the everyday routine of it where you can write down and give some thoughts. But that is something that I started doing at the beginning of my time in the Tri Cities, and I'd highly recommend to anyone because for me, the 27-year-old me thought, okay, I'll appreciate this down the road. 37-year-old me really appreciates it. And I think that's only going to grow with the 47, 57, 67-year-old me down the line.
There's a lot of things that are unheard, I feel like, too, at that minor league level where there's just so much day to day. You're around people so much. And one of some of the things that I like to discuss, especially with people who've done baseball and minor league, is, what are some of the best stories that have come out for you from there with Tri-City and crazy, circumstances or things that happen there?
There's a lot of those. I could take up me 5 hours. I love the experiences that I got to have, and I love telling those stories. I'm trying to think of my best ones right off the top of my head. I would say, well, for me, selfishly, one that was really great is I'm from the state of Washington, like I said. I went to WSU, and Bob Robertson was the legendary broadcaster for WSU. He did the job for over 50 years, was on the broadcast. Uh, his first job was in Wenatchee in 1949, announcing for the Wenatchee. My first job, and this is as a broadcaster for a team, my first job was in 2008 announcing for the baseball team in Wenatchee. So he would still do games for the Spokane Indians. So I got to know Bob a little bit from the time there. And it ended up working out where I was the on-field reporter for the All-Star game, where he was working in the booth with Pat Dillon, who I grew up listening to, who does a great job for the Everett Aqua Sox. So doing games with them was a great privilege. And then I ended up filling in for Spokane during they were in the playoffs, and I got to do a rain delay with Bob, and I got to do a game with Bob. So that has special meaning to me because this is someone who I grew up listening to. He is in a number of Hall of Fames, and to be able to, be to, as a peer to a degree, but like to be with him and to work on a broadcast and just share a booth, that was incredible. But as far as some of the players and some of the other stuff, here's a few stories. So that kind of got my brain going a little bit. There was some, I got to interview a number of Hall of Famers. The team in the Tri Cities, George Brett is part of the ownership group, and I never had met him, but there was a game in Spokane, and that's a big spot for that ownership group. They own the team in Spokane for both hockey and baseball, and I'd heard that he might be there that night. I'd never met him, and his brother Bobby is very involved and has been very kind to me in my career. He has been extraordinarily helpful. But I heard that George might be there. And I thought, well, and I worked for great bosses. I thought, if he's there and he had a chance to bring him up to the booth, I bet they would. So I didn't even ask. I just knew that, okay, if George Brett was there, I'm pretty sure that my bosses would do what they could to bring him up. So it was the middle of this game. I don't remember exactly what inning. And I just hear a voice from behind me go like, hey, is this our guy? And I turned around and there was George Brett. sat down and did it might have been 2 innings, at least an inning with me. So to interview him and to be able to, you turn around, boom, he's right there. Let's go, let's roll, let's have a conversation with George Brett here. He crashed the booth, which was such a fun experience. Other Hall of Famers, Fred McGriff was working as a minor league instructor or a roving instructor for the Blue Jays. The Dust Devils were up in Vancouver playing the Vancouver Canadians. It was one of those days I remember walking in back in the clubhouse, and I was like, did I just see who I thought I saw out there with, I think, one of the coaches? And they were like, it's the crime dog. So Fred McGriff was out there. So I ended up, after they were done on the field, I went up to him and said, hey, I'd love to do a quick interview with you for our pregame show if you don't mind. And he said, yes. He goes, I will do it, but could you help me out with something? I said, well, what? Yeah, yeah. What could I do for the crime dog? I grew up. You're probably too young, but especially not only a great player, Hall of Fame player, but he had the commercials, and he was Tom Amansky. They were on ESPN. I'm giving you a history lesson here. Nod, Patrick, if this sounds familiar.
I
I'll
don't
give
know.
you. I'll
Oh
give
yeah,
you a
go
history
ahead.
lesson. So back on ESPN, back in the days when Sports Center would get replayed a lot, there was this commercial, Tom Amansky, where he was doing baseball drills, and Fred McGriff would come on and endorse him and say, like this is Tom Amansky will help you become a good baseball player, that kind of thing. And they were on all the time, all the time. So they're kind of these infamous old commercials that were funny. So he said, can you do something for me? Of course. What can I do for you? And he goes, I would like a Tri-City Dust Devils hat. It's just one of those situations where you're thinking, like, what a cool spot. Like, I have his baseball cards. I grew up watching him play. I grew up watching him play in All-Star games, playing him on video games. Here he is saying, yeah, sure, I'll talk to you for a few minutes. Can you give me a hat? And I was like, well, I'll do whatever I can. So I went, and I think I talked to our trainer at that point. The trainer was kind of overseeing if there was extra hats or extra uniforms in case there was a roster move. And I told him the scenario, and he was like, yeah, well, here you go. So I gave him a hat, and I even have this picture still on my phone of Fred McGriff holding up his Dust Devils hat, and after we did the interview. So those are a couple that stand out. Here's one more. You really got my wheels spinning here. One more, and then I'll promise to cut it off after that. But Roger Clemens, his son was playing in the Northwest League one year, and a lot of times if the sons of great major league players were playing, then you would probably see them or had the potential to see them. And the thought was is that his son played for the team in Vancouver. The Tri Cities was probably one of the tougher spots to get to for Roger Clemens. He'd probably maybe stay to the bigger markets like Vancouver or Hillsborough or wherever, where maybe be a little closer. So no one knew if he was going to come to a Dust Devils game. So before the game, people were joking about it. I was joking, well, we'll see if Rocket makes his way to the ballpark. We'll have a spot up for him here in the Giesa Stadium press box. And lo and behold, that night, like the national anthem, I think, was going on. And our general manager comes walking up the steps. Who is right behind him? It's Roger Clemens, who is walking up to the press box. And apparently he had just gone to the normally if you're someone like that, you kind of give a heads up and they can give you, tickets where you won't be bothered. They'll kind of, be very aware of that sort of thing. So you can be in a spot where you can watch your kid play the game and not be, you watch it without people coming up to you all the time. Apparently he just showed up to the ticket office and said, hey, Roger Clemens, would it be possible to, get into the game? That kind of thing. That's what I was told. But then lo and behold, like national anthems being sung. I'm looking down on the field from the press box, and Roger Clemens is walking up the press box, and he watched the game from the press box, and watched the game. Just maybe I don't know, 10 feet to my left a little bit. So those are a few stories. I could bore you with more in the future, but you put a quarter in me with that question. I got a few of those like that, but those are the ones that came to mind.
Well, we could go on and on about those minor league stories. They do get really, really crazy. And just to shoot it back to your time with Idaho and the Vandals, kind of wondering what's your average, let's say, start with football. What's your average week like for that game? Because I think as much as anything we talked about baseball, but those games are every day. The big lead up is always those big football games. And a lot of people would love to be on that. What is that kind of like for you as the voice of the Vandals? How do you prep for a game? Let's say, it's Monday, and on the games on Saturday. What are you doing throughout the week there?
Yeah, and I kind of briefly touched on that, but more in detail earlier, more in detail on that. So, like a Sunday rolls around, I am getting ready to do the game, who the next opponent is. You turn to the page. Say we started a podcast, so usually in football season, one or two of the interviews is football related guests. So lining them up, getting that interview hopefully done early in the week, and usually it's an interview that I can learn something from, whether it's someone from the opposing team, if there's some connection, maybe a notable former Vandal player or something like that. So I want to learn, but I also want to put out, good content. So much of this is about content creation and finding new ways to do that, to engage with the fan bases for the schools or the teams that you work for. So get that going, get that out, and then just putting together my spotting board, updating the Idaho side of things, building from the get go for the opposing team, and just getting that. I mean, that's a piece by piece, block by block thing, and it takes multiple days, just because I mean you have to account for so many people on the field at the same time, and how many people will see action in a football game. There's so much to learn. And then I'll start watching the prior games, whether I want to go back and watch. I'll usually watch the most of it's not the full Idaho game. I might have that on the background while I'm doing other stuff, but then definitely get as much as I can of the team that Idaho's about to play, because a lot of it has to do with your identification. How quickly can you identify, who number 21 is, who's the cornerback, who are the skill players that you're going to see a lot? Who are those running backs? Who are those wide receivers? Who are those tight ends? What's the quarterback look like that they have come in and run some, there's a package for him. What's his number? What's his body type? Is he tall? Is he small? Is he, anything that helps to identify things? Because you do get to some football venues too. When Idaho played at Indiana, you're really high up there. You're really high up there. I mean, you're calling the game basically through binoculars. So to kind of get a feel for where you're going that next week and what your sight lines are like and how you can best call the game from where the booth is. So and as I mentioned before, talking to the coaches, we have a coaches show, so there's good information there that I'm getting from our coach and prepping those questions, because you're hosting an hour-long show. Football, we do the head coach, we do a player, and we do an assistant coach. So to be ready to fill that hour and to get great information and to make it entertaining not only for the listening audience, but it's streamed, the video streamed, plus we have a live audience as well. So to make it is interesting for everyone and make it engaging for everyone, and then button that stuff up, and there's no such thing as too much prep, it feels like, especially for football. And then you didn't quite ask this, but I'll jump into this. Basketball is easier. It doesn't mean it's easy, you just have less people to account for, so you're doing a tremendous deep dive into all of them, updating your boards. I have a board. It's an Excel spreadsheet, one sheet on each side, and use a folder. And I like how that works. People use different things, and different boards work for different people. That's what works best for me. And for basketball, a lot of it, I look at it is you're trying to cut down eye to brain to mouth. You're trying to do that in football too, but you have this, most likely 20 people, give or take a few, that you're going to see on the court in that game. And how you want to cut that buffer, you want to have that buffer cut down from the beginning. You don't want to show up unprepared, and then maybe you can kind of identify guys really quickly, start of the second half, into the first half. You want to be able to identify them from the get-go. And like that might sound weird, but that's the best way I can describe it. It's eye to brain to mouth. Like, how can you cut down that buffer to make it as smooth as possible? Because, and another thing I will say on the radio, this goes along this. I hate when people say numbers, because on the radio, numbers don't matter. They're not watching the game. Maybe there's simulcasting it, maybe they're streaming or listening, tuning into the audio and watching the video, maybe, but people don't give people information that matters to them. Know what your audience is. Know that the medium that you're on. So that's one that is a pet peeve. And when you're on radio, be descriptive as possible. So talk about what the jersey colors are. Talk about what the weather is like. Talk about the wind. It comes down to theater of the mind. That's the best way to put it when you're doing radio. Theater of the mind. So those are all the things that I think of when I'm prepping for a football game, when I'm prepping for a basketball game. And here, just another thing, now that I'm starting to preach on the fundamentals, you can never say the score enough. I've never walked away tuning into a broadcast saying, gosh, that guy or gal that we work in an industry where it should be more diversified than it is, and that it's getting better with that, but it's got a long way to go. So there's a lot of outstanding female play-by-play broadcasters out there, and again, hopefully that number continues to grow because it seems like it's been improving, but there's a lot of room still to improve. But listen to someone and you go, boy, this guy's telling me to score too much, or this gal's telling me to score too much. I've never had that. I've tuned into games where I'm like, what's the score? What's the score? I'm kind of yelling at my either my phone, my radio, my computer, my tablet. What's the score? Tell me what the score is. So I can't preach that enough as far as fundamentals go. You can never say the score too much.
There's a lot you touched on there, and we could get into it for hours for sure. And just, for those that are out there and want to do games like football, I mean, you're putting in, I've heard some broadcasters say, to do a good job on a Saturday game, you want to put in 25 hours of work before, like, and that would be a pretty good number, I would say, in terms of all the players you want to get down to make sure, your spotting board for anyone that hasn't heard of that, it's basically a big chart in which you have all those football players listed in the hundreds that you're going to have combined between each sides. You're talking to coaches, you're putting these things together. So it's certainly not a show up and do it thing. And then that would be another, precaution for those that really want to get into this. There's a ton of work that it has to be done beforehand to do a really good job on Saturday. And, feeding off that, I mean, what is it like as well on the basketball side of things? You got a little bit less prep in terms of the players, a little bit more games. What do you like to do, and what do you think you do unique in your prep process to do make sure you announce a really good game on basketball?
And I know I've hit on this. A lot of it comes down to relationships too. I mean, I can read everyone's bio. I do that. I scour every inch of the game notes. I do that. I think a lot of it is in whether you're starting a new job or you've been at a job for a while. And I've been fortunate at Idaho. I've been there for a while. So I not only, when I first started that job, I not only learned the history when I started that job, I've lived the history the last 11 years. I've experienced outside of when there's been, crossover games where I can't be two places at once. I've been a I've had a front row seats to all the history. So you can bring that to it. And I think it helps on the, the college side when you're trying to get jobs, places that you have familiarity with. Have you lived that history, whether it's where you grew up, where you went to school, all that stuff potentially helps. But on the basketball side, kind of going back to specifically what you asked, having just time makes a big difference. If you live the history of the program and you learn and know the history of the program, that makes a big difference because you can add in the historical context to games when hopefully things are going well and the team's rolling or someone finds their way into the record book. You know that record book like the back of your hand. But also, relationships that we interview our coach for basketball and for football before the game and after the game, and that you're taking time to build relationships. And you're not trying to you're learning a lot from them, but you're also some things you can specifically say on the air, and some things it's more on background. But even stuff that's on background, it allows you to call the game better. It gives you context to call the game better, and the more comfortable coaches or anyone you work with feels with you knowing that, hey, like what I say is not going to be taken out of context. If someone says something like, "Hey, this is off the record," they know that's not going anywhere. Like they have to, it takes time. That's building trust, that's building relationships. But the better relationship you have with the coaches you work with, the players, they might tell you a story. You might be on the road playing a game at throw out any opponent, Oregon State, and you might not have heard that before. It might not be in the notes, but maybe their best friend is a player on the opposing team. Maybe that their grandpa played there and it didn't make it into the notes. That you're around these people, you're having conversations with them, they feel comfortable around you that they could maybe bring this up, or you're just having a conversation when you're traveling or something, and that comes up when you talk. So I mean, it all comes down to you treat people how you want to be treated. And, when you serve as the broadcaster for a school or a broadcaster for the team, like you're telling that team's story and you want, like, of course, you're going to have more inflection in your voice. You're more excited when Idaho does something good compared to the opposing team. Now, my philosophy is I'm not negative towards the opposing team. Like, I don't like this is a competition. Everyone's trying their best. There's a story to tell. Of course, touchdown Idaho is going to be a lot louder than touchdown, whoever else. But my goal is too when I do a game, I want if someone's tuning in who's, a fan of the other team, They walk away being like, that was a really good broadcast. I understood what was going on in the game. I learned about the game. So it's all that comes into it. So the more you build those relationships, the better stories you can tell. And the coaches are more comfortable saying, hey, this is where we think we have the best chance in this game. This is where we think we might be weaker. We've got to find a way to maybe mask this deficiency. So we got to double team this guy, or they've got more size than this. I'm just throwing crazy hypotheticals out there. Nothing nothing specific, but the more that coaches trust you and you have a good relationship with them, the more information you get, the better you can add context to a broadcast. Because whenever any game I do, I want to think that no one is better prepared and has better context to broadcast that game. There are things you can control, like not all of us have a Morgan Freeman voice. Like if we woke up with Morgan Freeman's voice, like that would be we'd be probably that'd really add a boost to your play-by-play career. We'd be doing voiceover work. Like you can't control that. It's kind of like a pitcher with your arm. Like you can control it to a degree, how you enunciate and everything else, your delivery. But at the end of the day, you can't just decide I'm going to alter my voice for 3 hours to sound like Vince Scully. It doesn't work. You can't fake it. You got to be authentic. But what you can control is the prep that goes into it and the work that goes into it.
There's a lot that you mentioned there in terms of the relationships, and I think that was a huge thing to bring up because a lot of people, there's the art of the actual play-by-play, which you can dive into for hours, but you do got to understand there's a ton of work that goes beyond the scenes where you're building those relationships and learning, especially as being the voice of a team, what you can say on air, what you cannot say on air in terms of, the information you have on guys and teams and coaches, and learning that boundary is really important. It'll also help you tell the story of a team. So you're responsible for a lot if you're definitely like in Chris's position where you're the voice of a team in terms of, what's going on in the air, and also being able to, almost be a reporter in that sense and find out those good nuggets that can also make it to the air, and everything that are appropriate. So like, and if you're out there and even not doing play-by-play, but working on your social skills and relationships, that's going to aid you a long way if you're going to, be a broadcaster. So something to mention there. And I think going to the last kind of few questions here, because Chris has been very generous with his time, but what is the wildest finish you've been on a game in any sport, and how did you handle that on the mic?
Ooh, interesting. Okay, let me think for a second. I would say there was a game. I'm going to get my years mixed up. I want to say 2013, maybe 2014. This is back before, the pitch clock came into play, back before they changed the extra innings rule in minor league baseball. So the finish, and you might interpret it as like, three-pointer at the buzzer. And I've had those. We had one last year at Idaho, which was an incredible amount of fun. It was one of the top plays on Sports Center the next day. But there was a minor league baseball game I did where the game started. I think the team had gotten back really late the night before. I want to say got back at like 5 in the morning. So your head hits the pillow at 5:30. Then you're starting the game the next day. Tri-City's a pretty warm spot. So, and this is in the middle of the summer. So warm night. Game didn't start till 7:15, and it was against Spokane. And there was bad weather, and unfortunately, there was a player from Spokane that had a medical issue, and it happened on more than one occasion, is my memory of it. And so the game had to be stopped because of that. And so obviously, the most important thing was his health, and that was tough to see. But then it seemed like it was, once you got through the day and the coming days, he was doing okay. But a tough health situation where there was multiple stoppages because of trainers and I believe an ambulance, if I remember right, had to come out. But between the health stoppages, the weather, the game started at 7:15, and I believe it ended at like 12:53. And at that point in minor league baseball, you could not start a game after 1 a.m. is my memory. They did have a curfew rule at that point. You could not start a game after 1 a.m. And you're just like, I can't remember how many days in a row I had worked at that point. It was a lot. You had just gotten back from traveling overnight, probably run on 4 or 5 hours sleep, whatever. I call it sleep purgatory when you're on a bus. You can kind of, hopefully, you can zone out. It's not like real sleep. You're kind of curled up and doing the best you can. So that was crazy because that game just kept going between the delays of weather, the health delays, extra innings. It went on and on and on. I'm kind of proud of it because it was so unique that when again in your life will you have a chance to do that. But I was on the air for a long time, and just the when the game finally finished, it made it so unique. And then they did an NPR did a story where they were following around for one of their programs, kind of following around the team, and they on an NPR program they used that game as kind of the narrative to weave their story. So I'll have to go back and listen to that because it is a fun way to remember. Because as years go by, some of the details get a little more sketchy, but that finish and that wild of a game is one that really jumps out.
And to wrap things up, do you just a two-part question real quick, do you have a favorite spot that you visited with the Vandals or in Tri-City or anywhere that, is underrated in terms of like a ballpark, stadium, city that people should visit? And then secondly, what would be your best piece of advice to the young broadcasters out there that want to get into play-by-play or looking to improve?
Favorite spots, we'll start there. There are really great spots in the Northwest League, and there's great spots in the West Coast League. I think if someone wants to take a road trip, people do this and go hit up every spot. I think they are going to have a wonderful experience. I'd say, doing games when you're on the road in the Northwest League, doing games in Spokane's really unique. That's so much fun. Vancouver, they get that's a big market, and the way like they get into it at the end of games those were really neat experiences. The crowds, the atmospheres, from close to, as I mentioned, from Marysville, it's very close to Everett. So going back and doing games in Everett had a lot of special meaning to me. But all the spots here wasn't really a bad spot necessarily. And then with Idaho, doing games, having gone to WSU, and then the first game of 2022 was on the road for Idaho at WSU. So to work hard, get to the point where you're a Division One announcer, and to be able to make a really short trip, and to do that where you went to school, that had special meaning to me. That was my son's first game as well, so my wife and my son were able to come to that. So that had a lot of special meaning to me. Um, Basketball, I did the game at the Carrier Dome when I was doing women's basketball, so going all the way out to Syracuse. I've been to some far-flung places. I could bore you with the spots of where I've spent Thanksgiving. I've spent Thanksgiving in Anchorage, Alaska. I've spent it in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I've spent it in Davis, California. I've spent it in Boise. That wasn't that unique. Spent it in Huntsville, Texas. Spent it in Fargo, North Dakota. Might be missing one, but that's my best way to put it. It's crazy how where you will go working, as a broadcaster for a Division One college, and where your travels will take you. So your second part of your question, best advice, I just really emphasize do like getting reps. And you and I have talked about this before, not on this podcast, but there is nothing wrong. I admire people, and I have done this myself, where you go and you get a spot and you're doing practice. You're just doing your tape. You're practicing. That shows you want to do it. I went with a friend at the top of T-Mobile Park when it was Safeco Field, and to do a game to get reps. I've done a lot of those over the years. That's you get better at this by doing it. There is no substitution. There is no grad program or PhD program. I'm not saying those are bad things, but saying there's nothing that makes you a better play-by-play broadcaster than actually doing it. That is bar none the top thing that you can do. So go out and do it. And again, and another thing that I tell broadcasters when I get the chance to talk to them, the two best abilities that you can have, and obviously you want to prep everything else, but I mean outside of that, things that are also in your control, dependability and availability, because a lot of opportunities come up at the last minute. There's just these such a competitive field, your proximity. If you get an opportunity to, kind of take a step up in a way and have a bigger game that you're doing, or get a job with a bigger team, a lot of it is how dependable are you? Do people want to work with you? Are you good to work with? Do you make life easier on other people? Do you relate to what their job is like? And then, availability, dependability and availability. Maybe those aren't the most important things, but those are huge factors and they can't be overlooked. So those two abilities go a long, long way to find your way in this crazy business. Like I said, it's so much fun. It's also incredibly competitive because everyone knows how much fun it is.
Two great things to wrap up on, especially with all the strategy and advice to young broadcasters. Hear that a lot. Reps are so important. So make sure you're putting that work in, putting the time in. And secondly, I think, it's cool that you mentioned so many of those spots because those are some underrated locations, but that's the kind of stuff that you can be doing, the kind of cool places you can go in this position if you are, putting the work in and are fortunate enough and to be in the right place in the right time with all the competition in the industry. So again, that was Chris King. What a, wonderful broadcaster to come on and share all his time there with Idaho. He's still in the West Coast League. He'll be with the Vandals as soon as that season starts up and dealing with, all-star festivities, which come around the corner really soon. That'll be in Bellingham, Washington, the resumption of the West Coast League All-Star game for the first time since 2019. But again, Chris, I mean, thank you so much for coming on. Can't wait to get this one uploaded and, best of luck moving forward. I'll be sure to keep in touch.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you, Chris.